encourage you to check in the chat. Just say, where you're coming in from, how you're doing, and then I will get started on things. So yeah, I see we've got several people here already. So it takes a little moment for you to see all the notifications and get your way in. But hopefully people are showing up who are present. So I'm just gonna go ahead and get started. And then anyone who wants to back up and watch the rest later, you'd be more than welcome to. So here we go. Share screen. And let's hear some music. Let's hear from music from the beginning. Now, let's hear it from the beginning. There we go. That's what I like to hear. So, this is Marc Sabatella from Mastering MuseScore, and this is the Music Masterclass. And so this is my regular Thursday series where we talk about some aspect of making music, and we look at music that people have written and give feedback and try to all learn from each other. And right now we've got this competition going, this contest going, and that's what we're going to focus on because this is really the last week of the contest. So I'll talk mostly about that and some thoughts that kind of come into play while we're at it. Okay, so I have the chat visible here, so this is good. Thanks, people checking in, and so yeah, let's talk a little bit about the contest that's going on and getting darker. Oh yeah, I guess it's late enough that it's getting darker. Really? Okay. In Scotland. So the contest, everyone here, I think, is well aware of it. Some of you have already submitted things, but I still just want to keep talking about it for the benefit of people checking this out later and, who aren't necessarily here live, and a couple people who are live and still working on it. I want to give some more of my thoughts about not necessarily the contest specifically, but about music that comes up as a result of doing, trying to complete the assignment here. So I want to talk about some of the issues that come up and touch on some other aspects of things. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take a quick look at this little fragment of melody that I actually wrote last week. You remember this one? So this is what I wrote, except this wasn't a C-sharp 7. It was a C-sharp minor 7. So I'm going to change it back to that. Right, that was the original chord. And I changed this chord to C-sharp 7 at some point over the last few days as I was experimenting with some ideas. So I'm not attached to that melody. In fact, I'm probably not going to use that melody for anything else. But I wanted to come back to it and just sort of remind us that that's where we are. And I do want to talk a little bit, though, about some of the attributes this melody has, good and bad. So what it has that's good is a structure to it. Let me make sure I've got the chat visible here. Can't see the score. Arrgh. Okay. It's going to be one of those things where that happens, right? So let me kill the capture. Start it over. Give me a second. Stop capture. Start capture. Entire screen. All right. Better? Yes or no? Hopefully better. Hopefully you can now see the music. Okay. So let me check in on the chat and see if people are okay. Good now. All right. Yeah. So Dave, I am going to talk about that last chord in the final bar. So yes, absolutely. I will talk about that. In fact, let me just do that now before I forget. So, because this came up also, I think Joanne was asking about it in office hours. And so this is about this chord, and this is like, I've already altered the rhythms on this, so ignore that for now. It's about this chord, D sharp diminished with an E bass going to E, right? That's this idea of a diminished chord that is a half step below the bass note. This is a common technique that you will see used yeah. So this I remember like a couple months ago I got this new computer, more powerful, but it's also more crash prone. So that is just something I am going to have to decide trade off if that's worth it or not. So hopefully I am back. And let me come back to the chat here. And so the question is, am I back? I'm back with overhead camera, yes, and I'm going to fix that in a second. I'm going to tell it to go to that camera, and I'm going to tell this to go to that microphone there. Da, 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 da. All right, I'm back. Yes, yes. All right. So I now need to get MuseScore back. But let me finish the thought that I had. You don't need to see MuseScore right away to talk about it because but you do need to see the keys, right? So let's go with give me a second here. And back over here, share screen with this window. Okay. So the question is, do you in fact see the music now? Hopefully so. So the chord that we are talking about here is this one in the last measure. And is my chat window here? Yes. Okay. Hopefully we're good now on the camera as well. In fact, I can check that real quick. Yes, it looks like I'm good on the camera. Okay, so we have the music. We have everything we need. So we have this diminished chord, D sharp diminished, with an E in the bass. It's a dissonant chord, right? It creates a certain tension. This chord, as I was starting to say, has been a favorite of composers since Bach, probably since before Bach, but it's really, he definitely rose, he loved to end pieces, and fugues in particular, with this idea of a pedal point. And then maybe a Picardy third on it. So you might have a piece in D minor, like the toccata and fugue in D minor, but put C sharp diminished chord on top of that D minor, and then resolve it. So it's really, it's what's called, well, in this case, it's tonicizing. It's not tonicizing. D minor is the tonic, but C sharp diminished is the 7 chord in the key of D minor. Here we have D sharp diminished, which is the 7 chord in the key of E. Now we're not really in the key of E, so this is like what we call a secondary diminished chord. D sharp diminished to E, but putting pedal point underneath that. And then finally resolving to the actual key of the piece. So this idea of creating tension on a given chord by having this diminished chord a half step below the chord, then resolving to the actual chord. This is a pretty time-honored technique. So as far as a name, I mean, it is a secondary diminished chord. It's a secondary diminished chord with pedal point. As for a more particular, so yeah, the combination of secondary diminished chord, D sharp diminished, going to E is a secondary diminished. The fact that there's also the pedal point underneath it, some people will then call it a pedal diminished chord. I'm not convinced that that name is going to be meaningful to enough people to want to actually use that name for it. But if you use that name, I'll know what you're talking about. It is a secondary diminished chord with the root of the chord that you're tonicizing as the pedal point. So this is a common sound. And what it is, I know this sound, like I said, Bach loved that sound. It's been a sound that's been around forever. But jazz musicians tend to use it a lot as an ending technique at the end of a phrase. So like the typical example is Misty. Look at me, right? So if you instead go, and people also play all sorts of other chords there, but the idea that you might use the fact that we have the leading tone in the melody to then create a diminished chord around it. That's not the end of the song, that's actually the opening of the song. But the idea is that, yes, as an end of a phrase, that is a typical thing to do. Bach does it at the end of the toccata in Toccata and Fugue. He does it at the end of a ton of other fugues. So that's what that chord is about. So it's really an E7 chord, but I also would describe it as a multiple appoggiatura. In other words, this F sharp in an E7 chord, these are the notes in the chord. These notes here, the notes of D sharp diminished 7, none of these notes are in an E7 chord, but they all resolve nicely to chord tones. This one goes to there, this one goes to there, this one goes to there, this one goes to there. So all of these notes are non-chord tones that are then expected to resolve to chord tones. Or maybe this note will come down to the 7th there if you choose. I mean, there's multiple ways you can resolve them. But they're non-chord tones that resolve to chord tones. That's really the way to think of that chord. It's not functioning as a D sharp diminished 7 necessarily. They're just some non-chord tones over the E7 that happen to spell. If you want to think of it as like an upper structure type of chord, it's kind of that also, to use another bit of jazz terminology. So that's that's what I would say about that chord. So it is it's encouraging you to use those notes in your melody, perhaps, and then resolve them. And if you don't feel like using those notes, then don't use that chord. Just keep the E7 chord, that whole measure, and life goes on. It will be fine. I had actually gone through this and put in page breaks every 2 bars, but then lost that in my crash there. So let me resave it this way. Okay. So I want to come back now to my melody that I wrote last week and now finish some of my thoughts about this melody. I said I wanted to talk about what the good features and maybe the less good features of this melody. So this melody is the same rhythm over and over again. Right? It's the same exact rhythm over and over again. Some amount of that is good. Too much of that is bad. Like salt, or any sort of flavoring that you might add to something. A little bit's good, too much is bad. So I have probably gone as far with that rhythm as I would want to go. If I were developing this, I would want to lose that rhythm pretty right away. I would not want to continue that particular rhythmic motif any longer than I already had. So as far as writing that diminished chord in Roman numeral analysis, frankly, I would write it as I would just call it. Let me come back to it the way I had it over here. I think I would probably write this as, so the chord itself is the 5 chord. So I would say it's 5, 7, but with all those, no, that's going to be a pain in the butt. I was going to say, like you write 4 to 3, 5, 6 to 5, write all the individual 7 to 8, 6 to 5, 4 to 3. I don't think I would do that. 7 to 8, or I don't even know. 7, it's a 7th, it's a 6th, it's a 4th, and then it resolves to an 8, a 5th, and a 3rd. I don't like that. I do not like that. That does not make me happy. So typically, you can write it different ways. I think I would just call this what it is, which is the 7 of 5. And underneath that, I would just put the text pedal 5. And flip that down there. So something like this, so that that is a pedal point underneath it. The different people might handle that differently. So you can kind of take your pick about that. So anyhow, this rhythm here is pretty repetitive, right? So you have to be careful. On the other hand, some amount of repetition of rhythm is good. It gives the piece unity. Too much is bad. I am at the limit right now. I am at my limit. Now, one thing that is a saving grace about this is the repetition is a little more subtle because the rhythm repeats, but the pitches change, right? It's so we have literally twice. So it's like an A motif and then that same motif again, but the third measure is a different version of it. And then this measure is really the same as this measure, but transposed up a step. So I'm taking that motif, but now I'm developing it, right? I took that motif and repeated it exactly. Then I started modifying that motif. That form is quite common, quite typical in pretty much any genre of music. The idea that you might have a motif that you repeat, and then you start varying it slightly, and then you vary it more, and eventually it's not at all what you started with. That's a typical jazz way of doing things. And I keep bringing up jazz because jazz is on my mind, well, always, because I'm a jazz musician, among other things, but because of the discussion that's been going on in the community a little bit about the relationship between classical and jazz. And There wasn't a ton of discussion about it, but there was a video posted, a few comments, and I said I wanted to talk further about it because I do think it's some really important points. So when I bring up Bach and say, well, Bach did this thing with pedal point, and I bring up jazz and say, jazz, we do this. My point is, this is all. I'm not saying it's the same stuff. No, there's a difference between Baroque music and jazz, but I am saying we can draw from all of it, even if you don't identify as a Baroque musician or a jazz musician. We should be free to borrow these techniques in our own music. What I'm writing here is not, it's not Baroque and it's not jazz. It's just a thing. It's just the way I write. So, but I'm borrowing ideas that come from Baroque music. I'm borrowing ideas that come from jazz. I'm borrowing ideas that come from different genres. And the idea that we might cut ourselves off from certain sounds just seems artificial to me. I mean, if you just absolutely don't like the sound, okay, fine. But if the sound has any value to it all, then make use of it. Find a way to make use of it. So I'm going to keep coming back to themes about this. So right now, I feel like I'm about as spent as I can be on that motif. And if I were to keep writing the piece, you know, it would have to do something else after that. I would have to leave that rhythm. So after or something like that, right? I would have to leave that. I would want to stop having that dotted quarter tied on beat one. So right there in bar 5, I would do something other than that dotted quarter. I think I would keep the motion going. If I was arranging this for a larger ensemble and thought, well, maybe I can get away with just changing instrument colors there. Yeah, maybe. But I think melodically first, instrument colors second, usually. Sometimes the instrument that I'm writing for will influence my choice of the melody, but I seldom want to use instrument colors as a substitute for good melodic thinking. So if the melody should stop repeating that motif, then I'm going to stop repeating that motif. Now, accompaniment patterns might continue the motif longer. Like if you're doing this, right, that motif in an accompaniment pattern, you do that for much longer periods of time, as long as you have different sort of melodies sitting on top of it, different rhythmic ideas sitting on top of it would be the typical way of kind of dealing with that. So when I'm composing a melody, I've mentioned this before, that it's tricky to know when you've held on to an idea too long, because it might have taken you longer to write those 4 measures than it's going to take people to listen to them. Right? So, sorry, there's some activity in the office down the hall here that just wanted to make sure it sounded like it was my door for a second. So that amount of time it takes you to write 4 measures might fool you into thinking that you've spent longer on those 4 measures, and therefore it must be time to move on and do something different because the listener must be tired of it. But you have to step back and ask yourself, well, how long does it take to listen to those 4 measures? So for me, these 4 measures, even as a listener, I'm done. But you have to think about these things. So as a composer, you have to think about how long you spent composing it. As an improviser, that doesn't come up. And I do want to talk about improvisation as it relates to some of these topics here. So the thing about improvisation, just get rid of those Roman numeral things there. The thing about improvisation is it's been a part of music since the beginning. I mean, people were improvising before they were notating, right? But even when they started notating, it didn't preclude improvisation. Bach was famously a great improviser. And I keep coming back to Bach, but, lots of Liszt was a great improviser, right? Lots of great keyboard players were known as great improvisers as well. And at some point, that kind of started to be drummed out of classical performance. And there's a whole kind of history about how that happened and why that happened and whether it should have happened and, you know, what happens if you try to bring it back. And improvisation has a role, I think, to play. And there's a sort of I think of it as a demeaning way of looking at it, but in 20th century music, you'll hear people talk about chance music, John Cage and other people, where things are left to chance, or aleatoric, which implies something about randomness. Improvisation isn't random. It's letting the performer guide the piece intelligently. It's not meant to be random. So I don't like those terms, but improvisation is about allowing performers to bring something to the piece. And then, you know, the thing is, if you just hand the performer a blank sheet of paper, then it's all them. It's not you at all. So the trick is to find the right balance. How much is you? How much you're leaving up to the performer? And if you think about all the, you know, classical concerti or concertos, often they were written with a cadenza that was intended to be improvised. So you play everything as notated for 8 minutes, and then there's a 1 minute long cadenza at the end of the movement where the soloist just goes wild for a minute and then brings in the orchestra for the last, you know, 20 seconds or whatever. That model was the way concertos were really intended to be performed. At least a lot of them were. But then, because maybe some performers got uptight about improvising their own cadenza, someone, maybe not even the composer, but maybe someone else hired by the editor, or maybe one of the first person to have performed it, maybe, would write out a cadenza and publish that. And sometimes there's several published cadenzas for the same concerto. So anyhow, that's part of the role of improvisation there, and that's one in which you wait until the end of the piece and now tell the performer, do your thing. And there's something to be said for that as a model, because after 8 minutes or however long your concerto movement has gone, after that much time, the performer has and the audience have all the melodic material very well set in their head. And so when they go to improvise, their improvisation is going to relate to the thematic material. It can't be otherwise, because they just finished hearing. They just finished playing and hearing those themes. So and I've actually not gone back to listen to any particular concertos to hear different interpretations of cadenzas, because most of the concertos that I've listened to, by now there's like one official cadenza that everyone plays, and you know, the Tchaikovsky violin concerto, whatever, there's a very specific cadenza that everyone plays, and no one dares. I'm gone again? Really? Huh. I seem to still be here. Someone else seeing a problem? I think I'm still here. Huh. Anyone else having a problem now? Let me see. Am I really gone? Huh. Yeah, it's okay here too. So I think, William, you might just have to like refresh your browser or something. Okay, so that idea that you might put the improvisation off towards the end when you've kind of then got really good ideas of what these themes are, yeah, that's fine. But often in a jazz setting, the music is black? Huh. Yeah, I'm not seeing that myself. It looks like it should be working from my perspective. You know, temporarily I flipped over to the other screen so I could type into the chat. So maybe temporarily you might have lost the music, but I think they should all be good. So in a typical jazz setting, we don't wait to the end to improvise, but we do typically write some melodic material, the theme that we play first. We play the theme. Yeah, so it's perfectly normal, Joanne, that while I'm typing into the chat, you're looking at me typing into the chat. I have to switch windows to do that. Okay, so typically we would write an entire theme, 32 measures or whatever, and then improvise on that chord progression. And that's a fine way of organizing things in jazz. We're all used to it. It's fine. But I actually resist it. I shouldn't say I'm not a fan of it, because I do it all the time, but I'm often looking for alternatives. And that's what I want to talk about right now. What I'm going to do is go back to this piece here, and I'm going to say I'm going to play those 4 measures of melody, and then I'm going to leave the rest open for improvisation. I'm just going to come here and say tools, fill with slashes. So I'm giving myself permission to do whatever I want in these bars. And then, maybe I'll give myself permission to do that for another 4 bars. Let me fill some more bars with slashes. And then maybe I write a little bit of melody here. And I'm just going to write something real simple. Let's see. Okay, I just made up something. I don't believe in it at all, but I'm just... And then maybe I call that good and then let myself improvise a little more. This thing that I'm doing is, I would say, not common. Maybe it should be. This kind of thing where you're letting it develop organically between composed phrases and improvised phrases can be quite powerful. I actually messed this up because I'm thinking that these chords were going to go twice as fast, twice as slow as they were, because I hadn't practiced it yet. Improvising is about knowing the form of the piece, having it in your head so that your melodic ideas fit what you're trying to do. So that's what I messed up there. I was just sight reading, and often I can sight read chords pretty well, but in this case I didn't realize that coming off of one, yeah, I don't like that. I don't like the melody I wrote. That's the problem. Or if I knew that I was going to have to play this melody, I would have to start thinking ahead about my improvisation going earlier. 1, 2, 3. Right? I might set up that 8th note rhythm in the previous few beats so it doesn't catch me off guard when it comes in there where I actually wrote it at measure 13. So writing pieces that kind of intersperse composed and improvised passages in a more organic way than just, here's the theme, now we're all going to improvise, then we play the theme again. That's the typical jazz cliche, and it's fine. It lets people survive gigs. You can play a 4-hour gig with people you've never played before, with no music whatsoever, no sheet music at all. You just play tunes you all know, and you use that exact form. Play the head, take turns soloing, play the head. You can do that all day long without thinking about it. But and that's fine, and that gives you a particular vibe. But if you want to bring more of the composer's aesthetic into it, then this type of approach where you're interspersing your composed passages with your more improvised passages is really a nice way to go. So I'm not suggesting that you do that for this contest because it was kind of your job to write a melody. So I'm not saying that that's how to treat this contest necessarily. I'm going to come back to that thought because probably you want to actually write the melody. So, we can go off of that. However, I will say if someone does something like this, where you do a really good job of thinking through, here's what I'm going to compose, here's what I'm going to leave open for improvisation, here's what I'm going to compose, here's what I'm going to leave open for improvisation, and it all hangs together well, more power to you. I'm not going to complain at all about that. I think that would be a powerful way of going about it. Just make sure you write enough that, make sure you're writing enough that you're not giving the improviser just a blank page of chord symbols and, or just a blank page, period. But also enough that you're establishing your own contribution for us to judge in the competition. Music isn't a competition normally, but this one is, right? So, but even if you don't actually choose to leave anything open for improvisation, consider the possibility of using this as a compositional device. Like, maybe you write a few measures that you're sure of, and then you're not sure what you want to have happen for the next 8 measures, but you know you want this. Yeah, I don't know why I just felt like holding on to that E there. That's not really a great choice, but it's what I kept doing, so I guess that's what I'm going to write for now. And then tied to a quarter, and then do and then so. And actually, I'm not really playing an 8th note here. Ooh, bam, bam. I'm playing a duplet. Da, 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 da. So I think I should be a little truer to that in my notation also. So I'll notate that as a dotted quarter. Come on. Let's try this again. Dotted quarter and then Control-2 to make it a duplet. And there we go. There's multiple ways of notating duplets. Some people would notate that as 2 quarters. Other people notate as at 2/8. MuseScore defaults to this way, and I'm not going to argue with it because whatever. I don't care right now. So, except this is still supposed to be tied. And then this is supposed to be an actual E. There we go. Okay, so I wrote that little bit of melody and then I left these few measures open. Right now I'm leaving them open for improvisation, but maybe over the course of the development of this piece and the course of working on it, maybe then I come up with something. Oh, now I know what I actually want there. I don't want to leave it open for improvisation. I actually have the right passage to put in there. So this idea that you might identify the most important passages, write those, and they might not be consecutive, and then go back and fill in some things later. It's sort of an improviser's mentality, but then you eventually fill it in. And if Joel, if you are responding to me, you're responding to Jim, but yeah, because Jim is commenting about the same thing. These arrangements might start off with improvised fragments in there, and then once the musicians fill in those fragments, they sort of get cemented. And in the case of Dave Pell, he might have left those open forever, and those were just parts of things. But in the case of a lot of the Dixieland arrangements, and by the way, the term Dixieland is one of those ones that some people don't really, we all know what we mean by it, but then some people will get into religious debates about whether we should call it Dixieland or Chicago style or New Orleans style or whatever, or just traditional. But whatever, I know what we're talking about. Often what would happen is these passages would be left open for improvisation. And this is also true about early swing era music, especially like Glenn Miller music. The music might have been left open for improvisation, but then the guy who took the solo on the record and it became a hit, oh my God, now you got to play it that way forever, right? So String of Pearls, right? that song? I'm not playing the chords right. There's some motion like that in it. I'm butchering it, but if you know the song, you know what I'm playing. But the trumpet solo. Right? It's like this whole triplety sort of thing, brilliantly executed solo that I'm sure was improvised at one point, and then they were like, "Oh, you got to keep doing that," and then it became part of the thing. So the idea that you play that thing, it might have been improvised or only partially worked out. Like with Bird, Joel, if you listen to two different recordings of the same piece, he's clearly improvised. He's not playing the same solo. But yeah, he uses a lot of the same material because it's material that's part of his language, which is extremely well developed. But that String of Pearls solo, everyone who plays that plays the identical solo because it's the perfect solo for that spot in the song. And yeah, every once in a while someone says, "Oh, I'm going to improvise something better," and it's never better. It's never better. That what might have originally been a spot for improvisation that eventually turned into, okay, we're not going to improvise. We're just going to play. Jim, you probably know the name of that trumpet player that did the String of Pearls solo, and it went, Buddy. No, I'm not remembering. Not remembering. I'm remembering who the trumpet player who did that solo was, and that's a shame. I should know that. Someone look it up and let me know. The trumpet solo on String of Pearls. So yeah, any number of these solos might have. So I can't speak to any particular examples. That one just came to mind. I have no specific historical information on any specific solos. I do know, though, that this came up, like, there are quotes of Duke Ellington, quotes of Charles Mingus saying this, telling their musicians, hey, you don't have to improvise here. It's okay to play that same thing you played last night. They all seem to like it. Or the same thing on the recording. And then also when the band members change, the new guy in the band has to learn the old guy's solos. And they might never have been written out. They might not be written into the arrangement. You just learn them from listening to the recording. Or you listened because you maybe apprenticed with him. So even if there wasn't a recording, you might have played with the original guy live, and you overlapped for a little while before he left, and you took over that spot. Bobby Hackett. Yeah, no, I think you're right, Dave. I think you are right, Bobby Hackett. I believe you are correct about the String of Pearls solo. In any case, that's obviously the name I was thinking of. So I'm going to go with it. So this idea here of figuring out how much of the melody you totally believe in and where you want to write that and where you're possibly seeing other options is a really good technique. But I'm going to go another step further with this. So I'm going to go another step further with this. What if after playing, I find two different ideas that I like here. And I also find I like and I can't decide between them. Well, you don't have to decide between them. Sometimes you're going to have some ideas that you're totally confident about, like maybe this line here, I'm totally married to this at this point. But I'm still not married to anything there. And maybe I find a couple that I'm like, I kind of like this one, I kind of like this one. So what this does, this is the same thing that I mentioned when we were talking about the collaborative piece that y'all were working on and maybe still are. The idea that you can have it both ways. Have this and have it go that way the first time, and then the next time this melody comes back. See you later, Joel. Nice having you here. And by the way, Joel, I am going to be talking about your finished piece at some point. But yeah, right now I wanted to focus on this. But I'm glad to see that you finished that suite, or at least that movement. So if that same chord progression comes back later on in the same actual piece here, we could certainly use it, and maybe, nope, that's not the same one there. So it never comes back exactly in this piece, but then, so then maybe what you do is, remember there were repeat signs around it at one point? Well, maybe what you do is say, well, I'm going to do, this is however long it is now. It's long, I doubled the length of everything, so it's longer than it was before. You play through this, and then maybe you come back to this fragment of melody as part of the development section, and this time you go a different place with it, and that is part of how you develop that theme, is by taking it in a different direction than where it went the first time. Or within the development section, maybe it's a series of 8-bar phrases, each one of which starts with this motif, then goes somewhere else, then comes back to this, and then goes somewhere else. And maybe in the process it modulates. So when this thing comes back, maybe when it comes back, like, okay, I'll do a version of this. I don't know why I'm singing. It's fun. Now I'm going to play it in that key. So I've transposed it to D. So I let that fragment be in A, and then I developed it in a way that modulated to D, and then I continued in D. Development sections of sonatas and so forth are full of that sort of thing. And Joel's fugue is full of that too. All fugues are full of that kind of thing too, I should say. Bringing that same theme back in different keys. And maybe it'll go to minor. So I love this. Now I'm going to go to the relative minor. Now I'm in F sharp minor. Oh, and I got to be on the root. It's not working as well. So in minor, I have to think through, because if I just go down a half step, it makes me want to go so I think I'm going to go down a whole step. I'm going to have to rethink the harmonies in minor keys, because these are harmonies that make sense in major keys. When I move to minor, I have to rethink that. But in any case, in developing a theme, you might use those 4 bars, take it into different keys, and then finish that idea different ways. That's how one theme can spawn off lots of stuff and turn into a fully fledged piece. So yeah, I don't know. These are some of the thoughts that I had that I wanted to talk about as ways of approaching a piece that are maybe not linear, is the best way I could describe it. It's not like I start writing at the beginning and then stop when I run out of notes. I'm looking at a big picture, filling in some spots, and then going back and filling in other spots, and then maybe expanding the middle and add, so that's a kind of approach to composition that allows you to create large forms that make sense. And maybe your goal isn't to create a large form. Maybe you just want to have it be 32 bars and be done. But if you're looking for how to do those things, I think bringing in some of this jazz type of mentality, it's not just a jazz mentality, it's a composer's mentality, really. But it's a composer who's open to alternative ideas. So all composers create development sections in essentially the same way I just described, some variation of that. But a jazz version of that might just take you in different directions by actually having you leave some spots open like that and then come back and fill them in, and they might produce different results. So what I want to do now is I'm going to partially switch gears and make another couple observations about this chord progression itself and what I might want to do with it. You remember that when I first came back after the crash, that second chord there was actually a C sharp 7, not a C sharp minor 7. When we talk about why I'm thinking of that change, I have an A chord, and then I have C sharp minor with a G sharp in the bass. And then I have F sharp minor, right? Those are the chords, and these are the chords we are given. And they're totally diatonic. Everything's in the key of A. If we tune our harp to an A scale, we don't have to do any pedal changes. I like that analogy, actually. So this is all notes of the A scale here. However, this C sharp minor going to F sharp minor, I feel could be strengthened by making it a secondary dominant, making it be C sharp major or C sharp 7 going to F sharp. So that, to me, is a really strong progression. There's nothing wrong with the diatonic version. And so again, if I'm developing a longer version of this, maybe I use the diatonic version one spot and the secondary dominant somewhere later on. And that's what he does have here. He does actually have this secondary dominant later, but then he's got something different going on using a diminished chord and some other stuff. But in my case, I just decided I really wanted this to be a C sharp 7. Right? And maybe, depending on the pacing of things, I made this point in the past also, if the chords are going by slowly enough, I don't really need the bass line to be so stepwise, because it makes sense for the bass to be moving from root to root more at slower tempos. We're not as aware of the voice leading if it's 4 beats later, or in a jazz setting, it might be a walking bass line. Right? If it took me 4 beats to get there, I'm playing a walking bass line here, all quarter notes getting me from one chord to the next. And when I do that, there's not a lot of reason to have to land on inversions of the chord. You go where your walking bass line leads you, which is mostly by step, but it's not necessarily connecting each chord by step. Each note of your walking bass line is by step, hence the word walking. But I took 4 beats to get to C sharp, as opposed to bum, 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 right? That seemed like, why did you just mark time there? You could have gone or done, something to try to but you didn't need to, was the point. You could have and then also to get from that G sharp to the F sharp. Once I've landed on that G sharp, what do I do now? I just hang there until I get to F sharp? No, why not go and make that be a walking line? Actually walk for 4 beats to get there. And yes, I know I've only given myself 2 beats here, but if I was doing this with a walking bass, maybe I would make it be 4 beats per chord, basically. So I may or may not want the inversion, is my point. Yeah, and Jim, I've just seen your comment about novelists, and yeah, that's absolutely true. And this is why I always think is one of the stupidest cliches. I mean, lots of cliches are really stupid, but there's that cliche that you see in any number of TV shows or movies where someone goes to write a book, and what do? They take out their typewriter. Okay, it's a cliche that's that old. And then they put in a sheet of paper, and they go, and they type chapter 1. And then they sit there and start thinking, what is this book going to be about? No one writes that way. The person who wrote that book, the person who wrote the script for that movie didn't write the script for that movie that way. They should know better. They should know that's not how people write movie scripts. You don't just start at the beginning with scene 1 and then right until the end. You plan out the overall big picture. I'm not saying it's impossible to write that way, but it's not common. It's not productive. It doesn't typically work very well. And those aren't the types of scripts that tend to get made into movies. Those are the ones that sit in someone's basement and never get made into movies, because they typically won't have very much structure to them. So I don't know why that is such a cliche in TV, unless it's like a little inside joke where the screenplay writer says, "Hey, we're going to pretend that this is how you write movies because everyone else does it, and we'll all laugh because I'm doing that thing that we all know we don't really do." I don't really know. Anyhow, so I want to make a point about this chord progression. Now that I've gone, and I'm just going to eliminate that inversion thing for now because, again, not really doing anything for me. I'll either play the G sharp in the bass or I won't. But I want to make an observation about this little chord progression now. And some of you, if Humble New Music, you're around, tell me if you've ever heard this melody before. I got to see if I can get this right now. How I do it that playing it in A. You recognize that piece? Okay, so give you a couple seconds to post that in there. Yeah, that's my piece that I wrote last summer for my father, right? It's the same basic chord progression. Yes, I had to make a couple slight adjustments because this borrowed chord here, this is not a diatonic chord, right? This would require the pedalist, the harpist, to change from F sharp to F, to go from the F sharp and then flip the little lever to make that, or flip the pedal for from F sharp to F. But that same thing happens, and it's that much more clear if I take this whole thing here and transpose it to B flat. It has the same thing, G to G flat 4 to minor 4, and this is basically the same thing. It's G to G flat, except here there's a different, it's a 2 chord instead of a 4 chord, but the same thing. Same borrowing from a minor key sound. B flat major doesn't have the G natural. B flat minor has the G flat. So it's basically the same chord, whether I call it C minor 7 flat 5 or whether I call it E flat minor. It's basically the same sound. So yeah, my point of this isn't to say, hey, he stole my chord progression. It's to say that these sorts of chord progressions are really common, and everything that I talk about when I talk about studying harmony, it's not so that you can like, it's so you know how to create the expected sounds. These are good sounds. These are sounds that have been out there in the air for a long time. Let me go back to the other key. So these types of chord progressions are quite common. Now, Beethoven's Sonata Pathetique Movement 2, is that true? If it was an A flat, so that it goes to a 5 chord, and then back to 1, and then back to 5. So it starts off differently than this, but I don't doubt. Oh, yeah, it's not that. I mean, my jazz version of it does that, but somewhere there might be that, Dennis. I'm not taking that away from you. I'm just not sure exactly where that might fit in. But yeah, it's a common type of chord progression that I wouldn't put past Beethoven to have written. Is it the same as Bach's Air? Could be. The point is, it's a common type of chord progression, and not the entire thing, but every little chunk of it, going from 1 to 3 dominant to 6, or in analysis terms, from 1 to 5 of 6 to 6. Real common way to start off a piece. If you start with 1, you want to land on 6 a little bit later, and you give that 6 a secondary dominant. Tonight, Bernstein? Okay, maybe so. Let's see. That's a different thing. Maybe somewhere. Right there, right? I think he actually keeps it diatonic, though. But yeah, that definitely has it there. A Kenny Rogers song. Wow, that could be. And yeah, it's gonna remind you of lots of things, because this is a chord progression that, if you want to get from 1 to 6, that secondary dominant's your path there. And it's not the only path there. Yes, you could keep it diatonic, but those are your two main choices. You're either going to go 1 and then the diatonic 3 chord to 6, or you're going to go 1 secondary dominant to 6. But if you're trying to get from 1 to 6, yeah, that's going to be a way to do it. And after the 1 chord, there's only so many places you could go next. You can go to 2, go to 3, go to 4, go to 5, go to 6. That's about the only places you're ever going to land on. You're not going to land on 7. 7's a motion chord. So yeah, tons of songs, like, a sixth of all songs are going to start off something like this, or have a sixth of all harmonic phrases that start on a 1 chord are going to have something like this in them, because that's typical. But then they might not bring in that borrowed chord. Now, there might be other songs that land on a 6 chord and use that borrowed chord to come down here, but they weren't approached that way. Every little 2-measure segment of every song, probably that harmony has come from somewhere else. Someone else used that harmony. Oh, here's another one. See if I can get this one right. Gotta get it in this key. Nope. Wait a minute. Yep, I think that's it. I'm approximating Clair de Lune, Debussy, in the key of A. There's the A triad, then there's the C sharp 7, then there's the F sharp minor, and then it goes somewhere different. So yeah, understanding that these are common things, it's a very liberating thing to realize you don't have to play darts to write a good chord progression. You don't throw dart to the dartboard and say, oh, it landed here. Did I like that? I don't know. Do I like this one? No, you just know things are going to work before they ever come out of your mouth, before they ever come out of your fingers, if you know how these things go. So anyhow, that's by making that change, I make it instantly feel a little, by making that change of the dominant 7th there, I make it feel a little more like whatever it is, a little more like this language using secondary dominance I like. Now he's using secondary dominance all over the place everywhere else, so maybe I was better off keeping that diatonic and not making it the secondary dominant. But yeah, whatever. So what I'm going to do here to close things out is I'm just going to improvise over this chord progression to establish A, jazz, improvisation, good thing, even though that's not what the contest is about. B, classical and jazz was something I said I wanted to talk about. C, there's a pianist, Ellen Rucker, a Denver-based pianist who is sort of a mentor to a lot of us musicians here in Colorado, who just died a couple days ago. And she is someone who I think would have really gravitated well to a chord progression like this. And yeah, so I'm just going to improvise a little bit and just think about music for a moment here, because sometimes in life we just want to think music, and I'm just going to improvise for a moment and then say goodbye. I'm going to pause there because I'm not even sure where that repeat goes back to. I think I messed that up when I did the doubling, but hopefully you enjoyed that. That was purely improvised. This section here caught me a little off guard. I hadn't really looked at it before, and I tried to make a melody out of it, and it was... I liked my melody everywhere other than there. I felt like I wasn't prepared for those couple bars, but that's what a little bit of practice would have done. It wouldn't have told me what notes to play because it's still improvising, but it would have made me prepared for the flow of those chords. So anyhow, hope you all enjoyed that, and then I will say goodbye to everyone. So, hello. There we go. So again, thanks all for being here for the music masterclass for today. And I didn't give you the date, but it's the 26th of May. And get in your entries for the competition, right? You've got I said till the end of the month. That gives you till Tuesday, as I recall. Tuesday's the 1st of the month, or it's the 31st, whatever. Do the math. Get it in before the 1st of the month. And just turn in something. Again, your chances of winning, if you don't turn in anything, are 0. If you turn in something, they're non-zeros. Infinitely better to turn something in. You will learn more. You will learn infinitely more. We'll all learn from everyone. And that's what we're all about here. So, see you later. And thanks a lot for being here.